Greetings everybody, it is November 3rd, 2019, and a question that I want to answer is whether or not a person can tell if a fruit tree, especially a pear tree or a plum tree, is going to bloom in spring in the fall. You know, can you tell in the fall whether or not it's going to bloom come springtime? And the answer is you can tell if it's going to try or not. There are things that can happen that can prevent the flower buds from actually materializing, but you can, such as the tree not getting enough hours, chilling hours, which is temperatures between the 50 degrees and 32 degrees. But you can tell if the tree is going to try. So this is a southern Bartlett pear tree. And southern Bartlett here is going to bloom this spring, or at least try to. And how do I know this? Look at these buds. You see how they're big and they're fat. Those buds have little clusters of flowers inside them. And if this tree wasn't going to bloom, the buds would look like what's on this stem here. Now this stem is not going to bloom. You see the buds in the corners of these leaves are tiny. And even when you get at the bud of the tip, while it's long, it's pretty skinny. And so that little branch is not going to bloom. But all these with the big fat buds, that's going to bloom, or at least try to bloom. Now this tree requires around 300 chilling hours. We almost always get that. So I'm pretty confident that this tree will bloom this spring. Now where the question becomes a lot more interesting is when you have a young tree like this one. This is Southern King, and this tree is about 4 years old, and it hasn't bloomed yet. I mean, it's just an immature tree, but it's getting to be just old enough where it might bloom this spring. So the question is there any reason to think that it will? Can you tell? Well, you can tell, and actually the answer is it's going to try. See that bud there? That bud is fat, just like the buds on the southern Bartlett tree were. Let's see if I can get the camera to focus on it. That's the problem with cell phones. Sometimes the cameras don't focus too good on these things. Okay, let's try that. Why aren't you focusing? There you go. All right, see how that bud is kind of fat there? It's going to try to bloom. And here's another one that's even fatter. And those should put on some flowers. Now, here's some more over here. This one's going to try to, branch here is going to try to bloom some. And we'll be lucky if we get about 3 or 4, 5 pears on this tree. But we might get enough just to get a sense of what this variety is going to be like. We had one little cluster to even bloom out this fall. That happens a lot on trees. In fact, the tree that's really bad for doing that is Tennessee over here. In fact, Tennessee and Southern King are related. Southern King variety is actually originated from a seedling from a Tennessee pear tree. And Tennessee is full of bloom buds, but it's also got a fair number of flowers on it, and that's just the characteristic of this variety of pear tree, is that once it gets cool in the fall, it tends to bloom out some of its bloom buds. And I've had one year where it bloomed most of the bloom buds out. So I hope that doesn't happen this year, but we'll see. It depends on how long this kind of cool weather lasts before we get a freeze. Now let's look at the plum trees. What about them? Can you tell with them? The answer is yes, you can tell. This is a Robusto plum tree, and see if I can get the camera to focus. And see those little how the buds on the tips of the twigs are clustered. The flower buds on the plums are often a little fatter than the leaf buds, but more importantly with them, the way you tell is that they're clustered. They'll be clustered around a bud that will become a new twig, and that's how you tell you have this cluster of buds. Let's look at this other plum tree over here. This is the Mariana plum tree. Is it gonna try to bloom this spring? And the answer is, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this to show the twigs well or not. Come on. Camera's absolutely not, on this phone is absolutely not cooperating right now. Let's try another bud where it's in the more light and you can see maybe a little better. Okay. All right, that I think did a little better. And you can see that they're clustered at the end. And so yeah, that one's going to bloom. And then what about the Tools Heirloom plum? Is it going to try to bloom? And the answer is yes, they're clustered at the end as well, and it's going to try as well. Now the thing about Tools Heirloom, and this, remember I talked about chilling hours, here's some young suckers that are coming up, and see the buds on this are not clustered. And so this is not going, this little sucker here coming up from the ground is not going to try to bloom, but the big tree is. Now, thing about Tools Heirloom is that it requires 600 chilling hours to bloom properly. So just because we have bloom buds on here doesn't mean it's actually going to bloom. If we don't get the 600 chilling hours this winter, those bloom buds will just degenerate and it will put out leaves instead of flowers. And that's just the nature of fruit trees if they don't get enough chilling hours. Here is an Asian pear variety called Korean Giant. And this is a young tree. You look at it, you go, well, it's an awfully young tree. Is it going to try to bloom? And the answer is a little bit. This one twig has some fat buds on it that are going to try to produce flowers. Now, this is another one where Korean Giant has kind of a high chilling requirement for our area, so whether or not it blooms will depend on whether or not it gets enough chilling hours. I'm going to try another species. This is a very young persimmon. Now I know just by looking at this, without even looking at it hard, that it's not going to bloom because it's so little. But if you look at the in the nodes of the leaves, that one right there could conceivably, but probably not. Now you come over here, and here's a persimmon. Even though the tree's kind of small, it blooms every year. It's a slow growing thing. And I want you to see how fat these buds are. And so this one is going to bloom this spring. I've never known persimmons to not get enough chilling hours, so I'm sure it will. This one over here has not bloomed yet. And to be honest with you, well, you look at that tip on that one, it might do it this year, maybe a little bit. We'll have to see. But you can get an idea if a fruit tree is going to bloom in